Grow your practice, grow your wealth, grow your impact. Find out how to spend less time in the dental chair and more time on the things you love.
Welcome back to the Dental Wealth Podcast. Glad to have you back for another amazing episode. Glad to have Matthew back as well.
Yes, glad to be here. I mean, we're on number 3 now, and I think we're getting a lot of traction here, so I'm excited to be back.
Number 3, having you in the studio. I'm glad to have you. It's nice to have the company, sir.
I appreciate it. I mean, I like the banter, and I feel like we're getting a lot of great feedback from the doctors that are listening to this, so it's good to mix it up sometimes.
Well, you know, and I always say sometimes when I start this podcast, thank you all for listening. The numbers keep showing that the content's valuable, so thanks for listening and being a part of this podcast. So, Matthew, what are we going to talk about today? I said I'm going to let you pick the topic here. What's the topic we want to talk about today?
So, I know you've basically said in the past, my main focus here is like when somebody calls tower leadership, you know, they're asking questions, okay? One of the biggest questions that I've been receiving lately is, you know, when it comes to revenue in my organization, what do I need to look at? So what should I be focused on? How do I increase that? Do I need to increase it? What do I do? When I look at the revenue, what details do I need to pay attention to?
Well, first of all the listeners should know that this podcast, if you think that this is over scripted or there's a bunch of, there's not. And basically I don't have notes here in front of me. Like a lot of the times we have this conversation, and I find that doing a podcast like this, a lot of it's got to be off the cuff. I mean, and really, I think you want off the cuff responses, and I think that sometimes in our media, especially, we get overly produced and answers are canned. And so, you know, I told Matthew, I mean, we really talked about this, like, you know, hey, what kind of stuff do you want to talk about? And the reason we do that is because I do want you to hear, like, these answers should be off the top of the tongue. They really should be, in my mind, fluid, and it's about sound advice, and it's about sound advice that works over and over again. Ultimately speaking, that advice comes from results and seeing results and seeing people get results and coaching thousands of doctors and knowing where the struggles are. Mm-hmm. The question you asked me is kind of a loaded question. And the reason why it's loaded is this. You know, it's like saying, well, how do you fix a patient? Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, hey, doc, how do you fix a patient? That's kind of loaded, right? I mean, it depends, right, on a lot of things. But I would say this. Here's how I'd start to answer your question. Ultimately speaking, you know, we're recording this. We're going into the last quarter of 2020. I ultimately think it's been an amazing year. The vast majority of our clients are showing the numbers on that and showing it's the best year. Matter of fact, we just did a quarterly workshop, and I asked the doctors to raise their hand, and I said, raise your hand if this is their best year ever. And I want to say every doctor raised their hand.
Yeah,
I didn't
we even had people virtually click the raise your hand button.
Right? Yeah, you were telling me that. Some people, even our virtual people, were like raising the raise hand button. So, look, it's the best year ever. There's no reason why it shouldn't have been. The people that were using COVID as a reason for it not to do well should probably reach out, because there's no reason why this shouldn't have been your best year. And in fact, most of the competition is sleeping. And the reason I bring that up is to say, we get to this point where people realize at this point whether they're going to hit their goal or not for the year. But I'd even dig further and say, where did you come up with that goal at? Yeah. And what people do is they start the year and they say to themselves, okay, I did $1 million last year. This year I want to do 1.5. Mm-hmm. By the way, that's a hell of a goal for the year, right? It's a big, giant goal. And I go, okay, so how are you going to get there? And what they do is they ultimately come back to me and they say, I don't know, right? Mm-hmm.
I don't even know why I had that goal. I mean, I see that 9 out of the 10 calls I have, I see their revenue goals. It's from the 1 to 1.5, and I always ask them, you know, how'd you come up with that? I don't know. Sounded great.
Sounded great, right? By the way, quit telling your team the revenue goals for the year. Yeah. That's a mistake, by the way. Revenue goals should not be the number they're measuring, because ultimately speaking, if you put up $2 million in revenue, they think you made $2 million.
Yeah. Doesn't end well.
And so, unfortunately, business doesn't work like that. It'd probably be nice if you did make $2 million and kept $2 million. But I look at this and say, okay, look, when people have this idea, well, I'll just work harder. Ultimately, that's not a strategy. Working harder is not a strategy. So what you have to do is you have to go back and you have to look and say, what do I need to be focused on? And I got a text this morning. It's interesting you asked me this question. And it was from a doctor. And she was showing me, there's 3 doctors in the practice. And so she was showing me the average revenue per doctor. And it was kind of interesting when she saw it. Interestingly enough, one doctor's producing at almost $600 per patient. The other one's producing at almost $200 per patient.
Interesting.
Well, you can see where the problem is, right? And so if this doctor starts out this year and says, ultimately, well, we're just going to hit $1.5 million. How are you going to do it? We're going to work hard. That's not a solution. Now, by the way, the solution could be a lot of things. That's why I said it's like diagnosing a patient with someone just saying you need to fix a patient. Well, there's a lot of issues that could be causing the average revenue. It's not typically lack of hard work. It might be a lot of other things that could contribute to that. One of the reasons why people engage with us is because the fact that they want someone to diagnose and treat and then give them a game plan, a treatment plan to fix it. But I would say that let's take that conversation for a moment, though. We do know there's an underlying problem there, right? We see one doctor who's producing almost 3 times as much as the other doctor. So we would know where to diagnose that. That would make sense if we actually. It's
important to have those numbers too. A lot of times people just don't even know the numbers.
What a great point. What a great point. You can't manage what you don't measure. Look, I don't know who came up with that years ago. I mean, it's an MBA type statement, but it's true. In an organization, and I always say you get what you measure. Look, ultimately speaking, if you don't know what to measure, then how are you going to get there? So it's really important. So glad you brought that up, Matthew, which is what are you measuring? That's like, I would write that down. What a great statement. Like, what are you measuring? Because there's key things in a practice that, believe it or not, if I look at that one doctor who's producing close to 200, I can make key moves around that doctor. And they're not even difficult moves. And this is actually the most important part of the conversation, which is to say it's a game of inches. That what we start to do is we start to say, well, that doctor sees 1,700 patients in a calendar year. And if we started just adding X amount of revenue per patient, well, what effect would that have on the revenues? And we start actually looking at it and saying it's a game of inches. One of the biggest mistakes in business is that people think that it's a game of, like, they throw out these gigantic goals. For instance, the doctor who's never hit $1 million in revenue throws out $1.7 million. Yeah. It's like, why don't we just get to $1 million or $1.1 million? Now, anyone who knows me knows I'll blow by your $1 million. Yeah. But I don't think that's where you should start. And ultimately, I'm not even sure that, like, I don't love the word gold. I just watched myself on a workshop. I didn't even know I said that, but I thought, man, that's profound. And not even pat myself on the back here, but I thought it was a profound statement. When the profound statement was this, I don't like the word goal anymore. I think I'm anti-goal. Why do I say that? Because it's not an affirmation. It's not an affirmation. You throwing out and saying $1.5 million versus 1, or look, we've got clients that are, obviously I use that depending on who's listening to this audience. We have plenty of clients that are doing well over 5 million, well over 7 million. But when you start looking at this, you start to go, hey, look, when I've started to make these moves, one of the reasons why such advanced practices come to us is because when you actually start trying to make these moves, a lot of it turns into these games of inches and knowing what you're measuring and knowing what to measure the right thing. We don't just throw out these big goals. And the reason I don't like that statement goal is to say, I want to hit this goal this year. Is like saying, I wish I could do this. I should do this. I'd like to do this. I'd like to run a marathon. But that's not really an affirmation, is it? No. Like, if you looked at someone and said, I will hit 2 million this year. Yeah. If I walked up to my team and said, we will hit 2 million this year, is a completely different statement than
my goal is.
My goal is, right? I'd like to. It's kind of like a cop-out. Like, I feel like goals are a cop-out now. Like, I aim to hit this year.
I mean, you see every consultant in the marketplace, too, says, what are your goals? What are goals this, goals that? And you see it everywhere, and it's like, well, if you write them down 3 times, then you'll end up meeting your goals, and it's just, my goal is, instead of putting it out there, saying, I will achieve these things. This is a completely different statement.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to have a strategic plan around it. Yeah. So then once we do is say, look, I'm going to hit 2 million this year. By the way, it's not it sounds weird to say, it's not hard to go from $1 million to $2 million. It's not. It's not difficult at all. It really isn't. And I'll say that like very clearly and confidently. To go to $1 million to $2 million, it's not hard at all. It's really easy to do. But what ends up happening is we look at it and say, but you have to then know what you're measuring. Yeah. So first of all, I would have an affirmation around where you're going. Quit throwing out numbers that are just like, by the way, if you're going to use the word goal, then you better have one hell of a goal.
Yeah.
Because you're probably going to come up 70% of it anyhow.
And it needs to be detailed too.
The bigger your goal is, the more likely you are to hit it. Because here's the thing, that when you start to say massive moves, when you have massive moves, if you were to actually go from, like, if you're going to set a goal, then go from 1 million to 5 million.
Yeah.
Like, if you're going to actually create a goal, then why don't we go to 1 million to 5 million? Why? Because you'd have to the amount of attention and dedication it would take to go from 1 million to 5 million would actually get your butt off the couch, right? And make you do amazing things, because you'd be like, for me to do that, I'd have to acquire 2 more practices or another practice, right? I'd have to hire 3 associates, right? So it would actually cause your affirmation to happen, because you actually created a goal so big that you actually started looking at it and going, that is such a big goal that I would have to do massive movements to make it happen.
Well, you'll be thinking about it all the time too. You'll just say, how am I going to get to 5 million? And it'll literally be on your mind 24/7.
And I would create like an affirmation and be like, this is what I will do this year. And then tell everybody your affirmation. That's a hell of a lot more positive than a goal. Goals, like, share your goal with everybody.
Yeah.
That doesn't, I haven't really seen that be effective either. How many of you know people that are like, this is my goal, and hit it? I would say the vast majority don't.
Probably not.
And because it's a let out. So I'm kind of going in different directions on this podcast. Like, what else do you want to talk about? We can talk about 100 things, right? Now, what is when I'm going in different directions is to say there's a lot to this. Like, you asked me a question that I could answer in a gazillion ways. I literally could answer it in so many ways. And it could peel off so many topics of conversation. But I think ultimately speaking, I would say to people this, is one of the things you have to do is create an affirmation. Like, what will you accomplish? So whatever, look, let's say it's a quarter of a year. Let's say you're using this and you use the next 3 months. I don't care when you're listening to this. It doesn't matter if it's October. It doesn't matter if it's July. Look at the next 3 months and say, this is what I'm going to do in the next 3 months. And go back and say, this is what will happen. And then create an affirmation. By the way, make it so big that you actually have to do something besides work hard. Yeah. Right? Work hard is not a solution, by the way, because you can only, that's the problem with working hard. The idea of working hard, the problem with that solution is, one, you'll burn out. 2 is that you can only produce so much. You can only see so many patients. Even if you go to the average revenue, you can only see so many patients. So ultimately speaking, you've capped your own income, you've capped your net worth, and you've capped your ability to grow. It's outside of the dental chair that actually you get the most bang. So I would create a goal, and I would create a solid goal, but I would call it an affirmation, and I would say, I will do this. And I would help post it up on the wall, put it on poster board, go get a graphics company to put on the wall, right? Yeah. I think you ultimately have to break it down into smaller numbers, understanding your average revenue per patient, understanding the number of patients coming in, understanding numbers that actually are tangible that you can actually go back and affect. Yeah. Because when you actually break it down to smaller increments and numbers that are controllable, so I would tell you step 2 is to break that affirmation into movable chunks. That you can actually say, all I would need is 3 more patients at this revenue per day, and I would hit that goal. Then how do I do that? We go back and say, look, all I would need to do is acquire a second location, and that would happen. We go back and we can look at it in tangible, what I call multipliers. We can look at tangible multipliers within our business that allow us to then hit the goal. So first of all, and I keep saying the word goal, and I don't even like the word goal, create an affirmation. That's what the first thing I would say. Look, you want to have effective, first of all, get out of your mindset. Don't say it's going to, 2020 is, look, I don't care when you listen to this. Look, this is going to be my best year ever. This will be my best month ever. Don't wait till, October wasn't going to be big. Whatever month it is, like I'm recording this in October 2020. Well, look, make this the best year ever. Make this the best month ever. Make November the best. How do you get in front of it now? Create an affirmation now that I will make this my best month ever. I don't care what the hell I have to do. Yeah. Then put a tangible game plan around that, which is like, look, I'm looking at my tangible numbers. By the way, if you don't know how to quantify them, reach out. We'll help you quantify them. And then what ends up happening is we quantify these numbers that we can move, and then we just move the numbers. We put those into quantifiable steps, and then we make those steps happen. I will tell you this, the smaller the affirmation, the less likely you are to hit it.
Yeah.
It's actually the opposite. We think the smaller the affirmation, the more likely we are to hit it. Mm-hmm. It's not true, because it won't motivate you.
Yeah.
It won't motivate you. It won't get you excited. The larger the affirmation, the more likely you are to hit it. The more you communicate your affirmation, the more likely you are to hit it. If you walk around with your chest back and say, this year I will run a marathon, and you tell everyone you know you're going to run a marathon this year, I guarantee you'll put on your shoes and go for a run. Yeah. The difference between that and saying, I think I want to go run a 5K this year, is it's not very motivating and not very difficult to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I think my son ran a 5K at like 5 years old or something, right? It's not difficult to do.
Yeah.
And look, for some people it is, and I don't want to minimize that, but you know what I'm saying. The whole point is creating an affirmation which say, I'm going to go run a marathon this year. So the same thing is like, I'm going to take my practice from 1 million to 5 million within the next 24 months. By the way, I can absolutely show someone how to do that. It's not that difficult to do. And so we go, okay, well, then that's fine. Well, we need to move it from 1 million to 5 million. And so that's ultimately the case. So here's what I want to give from that. I'm going to create a shorter podcast today, because I could end up talking through a lot of this and lose some of you. Go follow those steps. Create an awesome affirmation. Create the steps around it and implement. When you do that, you'll find very easily you can hit the goal you want. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.